Welcome, fellow explorers. My name is Christian Alexandersen, and this is Hemlocks to Hellbenders, a podcast highlighting Pennsylvania's parks, forests, and great outdoors. Every activity has the perfect setting, a quiet trail for a hiker or a sunny day for a boater. But for others, they want rocks. They want boulders and outcroppings. They want cliffs and crags. They want places with crimps and sidepulls and pockets and pinches. They want to climb no matter if it's sport, trad, top roping, or bouldering. They are Pennsylvania's growing population of rock climbers. While there's countless places for hikers and boaters in our state park system, that's not the case for climbers. Of the 124 state parks, only 3 allow rock climbing as an approved activity: Ohiopyle and McConnells Mill State Parks in the west and Ralph Stover State Park in the east. It's a struggle between climbing access and natural preservation, a delicate dance between local climbing organizations that use the areas and government agencies tasked with protecting them, one that's been going on for decades in the Commonwealth. I'm excited to welcome Dana Correcciolo and Mike Varlotta to the podcast. Dana is with the Eastern Pennsylvania Alliance of Climbers. Mike is with the Southwestern Pennsylvania Climbers Coalition. Dana, Mike, thanks for joining the program.
Happy to be here.
Yep, nice to be here. Nice to meet you.
Let's start from the beginning. When did you first get into rock climbing? How long have you been climbing for?
Actually, it's sort of a full circle story for me. So I started, I'm going to just say 20 plus years, is not to date myself too much. But back in college, a friend of mine was into it, and it was sort of before there were lots of gyms to go to, and took me to High Rocks. And I climbed up and was so scared I wouldn't come down. I was clinging onto a tree. And then really loved it after that. And come full circle, now living in that area in High Rocks, which is Ralph Stover State Park and Bucks County uh, Park, is sort of my home crag and where I do most of my stewardship work. So the first place that sort of scared the life out of me is also the place I spend my most time.
I started climbing 30 years ago, 30 plus years ago. So I've been at this a long time. I was in grad school at the time, and I went to Seneca Rocks. And so many climbers will tell you their first time out, just how how transformative it is, right? How powerful it is. That day at Seneca, like something went off in my brain that this just felt like, it felt like the most incredible thing I had done. And I knew that day that I was going to be in it very deep, and it has been deep for 30 years. That was before climbing gyms were open at the time, and that trip to Seneca was in the fall. And the guys that I went with, they told me that people didn't really climb in the winter because it's you just don't climb in the winter. I've come to learn since that that's absolutely not true. That you most certainly can climb through the winter, but the people that introduced me to climbing said that there was no climbing till the springtime. That winter, I started reading all the magazines and looking at the pictures and totally was blown away by everything that I was seeing for the first time ever. And I got it in my head that I was going to go to Yosemite the following summer and climb El Cap. And if you know a little bit about climbing, that's a pretty ludicrous idea for a one-time climber to to think they're going to do. But that's that was the idea that I had. And that next, when the weather got nice that following year, I didn't have a car, so that was a bit of a challenge. But I had a bicycle, and I did ride my bicycle to Yosemite. And I had a pair of climbing shoes. I had a chalk bag. I had a piece of 1-inch tubular webbing that was my harness, and I had a locking carabiner and a belay device. I had a stick plate. And on that trip that summer, I learned how to rock climb on that trip. And it was such a powerful experience. So many strangers were, took me under their wing. And I just can't say how, how powerful it was to have strangers teaching me so much and really taking care of me. And it pulled me into the community even deeper. Fabulous, so that was my first my first real season rock climbing was on that bicycle trip, and it's just continued from there. I didn't climb El Cap, but I did, I did some nice routes out there and did have a great time at Yosemite that first summer.
What do you love most about rock climbing?
I'm pretty fortunate. I also work in the climbing industry and have spent pretty much my whole professional career in outdoor recreation and indoor climbing. So I've got to work with climbers from the first moment they walk into the door to people who've been climbing 20, 30 years to gear vendors. Um, and I think the thing that I love most in just watching so many people get turned on to the sport is anybody can do it at whatever level they want to. So it's great to see a new person come in for the first time and have that experience like Mike described, or people that come in every week or go out to the crag every week and work on these projects for days, months, years on end. Families that can do it with small children and other families, folks with disabilities. I mean, I'm just in awe a lot of times of just seeing like the reach that climbing has for people both inside and out. So I really appreciate that. And my connection to climbing has changed a lot over the years. In my younger years, I was, climbing harder, chasing grades. And, now I think I have more of a love for teaching people climbing and, showing them, what they can do with that at whatever level they want to.
I love the challenge of climbing. Um, I feel that I've already used the word powerful, what, 2 or 3 times, and you're probably going to hear me say it 10 or 20 times more. It just feels so powerful to me to be under a route and looking up at something that you're not sure you can do, and then getting on a route. And if you're able to commit to it, like how often you have this feeling that I can't do that. That's too hard for me to do. But yet you try anyway. And sometimes you're able to do things that you didn't think you could do. And that feeling of just having these bound, we have all of these limitations in our head, and whenever a limitation gets shattered for me, that's powerful. And that feeling of wow, you know I did that. And what else, it leads me to think, what else can I do? And I love that feeling. So that's one thing. And then the other part of it is the community is just so special. And I find that 30 years of climbing, and every time I go out, most of the people that I meet have a similar love and passion for the activity that I do. Like we share something that's so deep, and as a result we become fast friends. Like the community is very, very tight, very supportive. I've just met so many wonderful people over the years through rock climbing. Community is wonderful. um yeah, so those are two of the big draws for me.
Your organizations are located on opposite sides of the state. Tell me how rock climbing is permitted in state parks versus state forests and on public lands.
That's an interesting question because I feel like a lot of folks don't understand how different public entities approach recreation in general, not just rock climbing. And I know that's something that I didn't know. We're trying to educate a lot of folks about that. So, for climbing, particularly in state parks, it needs to be an approved activity for that park, which is one of the reasons there are only 3 state parks that have rock climbing listed. There's more climbing in state parks, but it's not technically approved. In state forests, you can pretty much do any recreational activity unless it's prohibited. So when you kind of go up to a trailhead, you might see, no motorized vehicles or no equestrian or mountain biking or something like that. But if it doesn't say that, then, you know, pretty much you're kind of free to engage in whatever recreation you um, choose. State Game Lands is another entity that has a lot of public land in Pennsylvania and a lot of climbing on it as well. They are similar to state forest in that it has to be prohibitive, um, but their charge is really about habitat. So a lot of times recreation, or actually all the time, recreation is second to their conservation efforts. And then there's a lot of public county, municipality properties too, and those will sort of run the gamut. That's really going to depend um, on the local land manager and what they're willing to allow. And some of those things can be in contrast to each other. So you might be on state game land, which is right next to a state park, and not realizing that you're wandering from one property to another. Folks in general might not understand that there's different permissions, that there is a set of guidelines for operating and developing in state parks and state forest lands. So there's a proper way to go about putting in things like fixed hardware, or get permission for trail work or vegetation removal. Um, Anything you want to add to that, Mike, in terms of your understanding?
Thank you, Dana. That was so good. So well said. I mean, I guess what I'll add is that, like, back in the day, the climbing development was a bit like the Wild West, and when folks found good rock walls to climb, a lot of people were just equipped. They were putting routes up, and they weren't necessarily following all the proper channels. They were just kind of doing, a lot of people were doing what they wanted to do. And I feel that we've entered a new era, with all of these LCOs, these local climbing organizations that now exist. Our level of, like, responsibility as a climbing community, I think, has just grown so much in such a great way. Like, we are now doing things properly. And so we would never dream, we at SWPAC, and I'm sure Dana at EPAC, and all of the LCOs that are out there. No LCO is just going to, like, stroll into an area and just start putting up fixed hardware, or start doing anything, and until we talk to the appropriate people and make sure that the approvals are exist. So I feel really good about the last 10 years. I feel we've really made tremendous gains in far as being responsible stewards of the resources that we love so much. And it feels to me that it's our only hope to continue, because if the opposite were true, if people were just going out, like it used to be, and doing whatever they wanted to, you just run the risk of just upsetting all the wrong people, and just having stuff closed on you, and losing everything.
And we've started that process with a state park over here. Um, Prompton State Park actually reached out to us through Mountain Project and said, "Hey, I see there's routes listed here, but this isn't actually permitted." And we went through the process of talking with them and going through the paperwork, and we're sort of waiting for the approval process. But there hasn't been a climbing approval for state parks since, I don't know, 20, 30 years maybe. I mean, we have Ralph Stover, you guys have McConnells Mills and Ohiopyle, and those three are it. So nobody's gone through this process in a while. And we're certainly hopeful that we'll able to get Prompton on board with that, and that other state parks will be able to follow, because there's a lot of potential out there. But we really do have to work with the land managers and with their systems, to make sure that it's done appropriately, sustainably, and mindfully, not only for the climbers, but for the conservation of the resource as well.
And Christian, I could share. It's kind of a piggyback on all of this. One of our most recent big wins was with Forbes State Forest. And Dana, are you aware of, like, what we were able to do at Forbes State Forest this past year? Like,
I know some of it from talking to Joel, so
so maybe you've heard a little bit about this already, but again, Forbes State Forest is um, it's up in the Laurel Highlands. There is a rock wall that people have been climbing for 30 years up there, and SWPAC, for the last 7 or 8 years, we've had cleanup days up. It's called Beam Rocks, and Forbes State Forest. And again, rock climbing has existed there for over 30 years. We as an organization have gone up there to help with graffiti cleanup and some trail maintenance. And it was one of our annual stewardship activities that we've done. And a couple years ago, we, being up there a bit, the folks that were rock climbing up there, they had to set their own anchors, which involves putting webbing around trees, and then hanging this webbing over the cliff face so that you could then set top ropes. And the trees were so far away from the cliff face that, and some of the formations were detached. It was really complicated to set top ropes there. And when you did set the top ropes, there was this massive like spider web of rigging on the most trafficked, the most trafficked area in the Laurel Highlands, because it has the best vista in the Laurel Highlands. So all the folks that are coming out on their day hikes to see this vista are walking out on this overlook, and that's where all the rigging was. And so we were up there on a couple different days, and so one, it looked dangerous it was dangerous for all the hikers that were scrambling around on top of the overlook to be scrambling up there with all this webbing, this massive spider web of webbing. And then also the webbing is around trees. And, we've come to learn that decades of slinging trees with webbing and using trees as anchors, is not good for the trees. And so we 2 years ago started to talk to Forbes State Forest, and we shared with them the situation that we felt that there was a hazard with the way that people were using this resource, not to mention that it was detrimental to the trees that were there. And so we had many meetings with the different administrators involved. Rachel Mahoney ended up being our key point person. And they were really open to hearing all of this information. And through much back and forth, we proposed installing fixed anchors on the top of half a dozen climbs. And also we got permission to put in put in fixed anchors so that we could lead these climbs. It really felt to us to be a really big win-win. It was a win for the climbing community because we were able to open up, 6 really fun sport routes that are, a couple of these routes are 70-foot tall, which is like really tall for Southwest PA. We're used to climbing. Most of our rope climbing comes in at like 40 feet. And if you want to climb the tall stuff, you pretty much have to go to West Virginia. Where I am right now, by the way, I'm at the New River Gorge, where I spend as much time as I can. But to have 70-foot walls in Pennsylvania, that's a big deal. To be able to lead 70-foot routes in Pennsylvania is a big deal. But that took us 2 years of back and forth of presenting a plan to the State Forest Administration. We went out, we met with them, we showed them what we wanted to do. We were crystal clear about the specific number of bolts that were going to go on each route, how many anchors would go on each route. So everybody was on the same page. They brought it back to whoever they had to clear that with. They did an environmental review. But another good example of like that is something that I doubt any individual would have ever been able to pull off on their own. That's not a task for any dedicated individual rock climber. It's something that an organization, that has to happen at the organizational level. And again, SWPAC has had a handful of these really big wins recently, and we're feeling pretty good about all the work that we're getting done. That's all above board, and the collaborations that we're forming, the partnerships that we're forming with these land managers. It feels It does not feel antagonistic at all. It feels so collaborative. It's exciting to be working with these people. The truth is that we have our missions are very similar. We want to mitigate our impact as much as possible. And we as an organization can help the climbing community mitigate impact as we use these resources. So in that sense, it feels to me like we are a most valuable resource for all of these land managers. And it's nice to see that they're like valuing us as we go through all the protocol and all the proper procedure. I think we're gaining even more credibility in their eyes, and the partnership just keeps getting stronger and stronger.
Well, it's funny because you kind of talked about the developed ethics of what is appropriate or not appropriate. Speaking of Yosemite earlier, the Royal Robbins camp as opposed to the Warren Harding camp of what is appropriate. Should you be able to bolt, wherever you want? Is it just to get to the top to the fastest? So to be able to see kind of discussions that were happening 50 years ago are still things that are being developed and grown locally here.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, part of that is, some of those discussions were amongst climbers. What do we do about this? Who's going to put up the bolts? And now, as Mike was saying, those discussions are pulling the land managers in. So it was, very much ask forgiveness, not permission, and we're sort of flipping that around. Um, Unfortunately, what we're finding is there was not a lot of permission sought, so we're asking a lot of forgiveness lately, or going to land managers and saying, "Hey, you might not be aware of this, but this is what's happening," or maybe you are aware of it, and some of them might be sort of risk averse and don't understand. Yes, there's risk in climbing, but there's a certain amount that's actual, and some of it is actually just perceived risk, but that it can be managed, and we're here to help you out. So that use of partnership, I think, is going to go a long way in um, like tapping the potential of climbing in Pennsylvania and opening access to areas and legitimately opening places that people have been climbing in for decades.
Yeah, and I think rock climbers and skateboarders have a well-earned reputation of not seeking permission, of kind of being like, this is what we want to do, and if it's, against somebody's idea of what should be allowed or shouldn't be allowed, then we're going to put it up anyway. But it's the changing idea of, well, we want to climb here for the next 40 years and we don't want to be hassled. We want to do this safely, and we want to make sure, if we're climbing a state park or a state forest or national land, that we're going to be able to, and you don't have to worry about getting kicked off or run off. And in addition to that, environmental impact, to make sure that you're not doing anything that's going to harm the place that you guys spend so much time at.
It has become very obvious to us as a community that that old way of thinking is not sustainable. And I think it's safe to say that it's pretty much agreed upon that, that renegade style of climb wherever you want, like, people are backing away from that. It doesn't bode well for our future as a community.
And I think what you said about skateboarders is true in the sense that, we're one of the few recreational endeavors that we can't just go anywhere. So if we go to a state park and we say, "Hey, we want to hike in your park, can we put in a trail?" And they say no, then you go to the next state park or the next public entity. We can only climb where there's rock, So if we lose access to rock, we can't just go and manufacture it on a different piece of land, be it private or public. Similar to skateboarders, they find a good place that is challenging for them, and they can't necessarily find that every place. So it is in our best interest, to really form these partnerships with our land managers, because there's a finite amount of rock in Pennsylvania. And if we lose access to it, we can't just create it. And I think that puts us in a different category as a recreational user group in terms of how much we value our partnerships and what a privilege it is for us to find this rock and to be able to climb on it and to care for it so that we can use it.
What kind of climbing is available at the three state parks you can climb at?
So we have one on the eastern side, which is Ralph Stover State Park. The climbing area is called High Rocks Vista, and it's half state park and half county park. And it's sort of interesting because leapfrogs county, state, along the cliff band and through the park. So we get to work with two different entities. I would say for High Rocks, it is primarily top rope or trad traditional climbing. There are a handful of boulder problems across the bottom, a handful of sport routes, but by and large, you're going to be doing top roping and traditional climbing. As Mike pointed out with Forbes, we do have a lot of fixed anchors at the top now, partially because we've lost a lot of the trees at the top. And similarly to the webbing issue, there is a vista across the top with a pretty popular walking path, and we aren't allowed to tie past the fence. And so when you lost the trees or the rocks or whatever you're anchoring on the cliff side of the fence, your only option was the other side of the fence. And so, similarly, being able to put in fixed hardware for the safety of the climbers as well as the hikers and other folks coming through has been key in keeping access open to a lot of the routes there.
We have two state parks, like Dana said, on our side of the state where we have permission to rock climb. That's McConnells Mill and Ohiopyle State Park. McConnell's Mill has a long, long history. It's one of the places where Pittsburgh climbers have climbed, maybe the longest. I'm sure it dates back to 50 years ago. It's predominantly a top roping place, although there are quite a few routes that you could lead, but they're scattered around. Most people do go there to top rope. There's also great bouldering there. Ohiopyle is our other climbing park, and Ohiopyle, I think, has the best routes in the state that I know of. The climbing in Ohiopyle is just spectacular. It's the only area in the state where we've got some, there's some 80-foot routes at Ohiopyle. There are some hard grades at Ohiopyle. These have been bolted, they have bolts, they have top anchors on them, and you can really challenge yourself at Ohiopyle. The climbing is no joke at Ohiopyle. The other thing that I love about the state park is that in order to access the two most popular climbs, the best way to do that is on a bicycle. And so the hike in, it's a pretty, like the hike into the one area is about 4 miles. So that's a pretty long hike, but it's along the bike trail. And so most of the folks, what we do is we bring our bikes down, and a lot of us have actually bought bike trailers so that we can we put all of our gear on a bike trailer, and then we pedal in along the Yawk River. And, so we have a 4.5 mile pedal to get to the rocks, but what a beautiful multi-activity day. So you're getting, a 30 or 40 minute bike ride in to warm up. And then once you pedal in, it's a 1 minute approach to the climbs, to the areas where we climb. And then you get the 30 or 40 minute bike ride out. So, and again, it's on the bike trail that goes to DC. That's right along the Yawk. The setting could not be more beautiful. It really, it's one of my favorite outdoor days in PA. And the climbing is fabulous.
What's the level of difficulty for climbs in the parks?
It definitely varies. I mean, High Rocks has some really easy stuff. It's a good place for folks that are cutting their teeth on traditional climbing, which is placing gear yourself. So you can access the top of the climbs very easily. In fact, we don't have to bike 4 miles. We have to walk 4 minutes from the parking lot. And you can get right to the top anchors and then do some mock leads. And then there's also some very friendly lead climbs. So I would say for High Rocks, a lot of the climbs are definitely in the moderate range. I mean, we've definitely got some nice easy stuff. There's a couple harder lines, but by and large, mostly moderate climbs. Not to get too nerdy on climbing grades, but you have your 5.0s to 5.4s, 5.5s, 5.6s, a lot in that mid range, and then some in that 5.10 up double digit range. But the trad climbs there definitely not of the faint of heart. The people um will say or comment about it being like packed mud. There's a lot of shale in there and whatnot that crumbles very easily, but there's also some solid rock. So you definitely have to be careful in terms of what lines you do for traditional climbing. But the good thing is all of them are, or I'd say the majority of them are top ropeable as well. So
Dana, how tall are the routes at Ralph Stover?
Ralph Stover, if you think of like an A-frame roof, the point of the roof, which is open face, is about 115 feet, and then you go down to the lower ends of the roof, if you will, and those will be 40, 50 feet. And in between as well. Some of those are broken into two pitch climbs, just because of how the terrain is. And there's some climbs that only exist on sort of an upper ledge or upper shelf that you have to like wrap into.
Close to Philly is the park?
About 45 minutes north, depending on traffic. So we get a lot of folks from Philly, like, for our area, a lot of people go to the Gunks, which could be like a 3-hour ride in terms of destination climbing. But if you can only get away for the weekend, you'll see a lot of people come to High Rocks. Very quick and easy in terms of the approach. It's got over 100 climbs in it, but it's a small area for sure compared to some of these other destination areas.
And aside from the top anchors, no other fixed anchors, right? There's no sport climbs at Ralph Stover.
There's a handful. Yeah,
That
there's a handful of those in there, but I wouldn't say come to sport climb.
Mhm.
So,
And did those go up with permission?
yes, yeah, everything that's been placed in the park at this point has been put in with permission. There are some old bolt ladders and pitons and stuff from back in the day. Um, the interesting thing about High Rocks, so there used to be the Ralph Stover Climbers Coalition, back in the, hopefully I'm getting my dates correct, 90s or so. And they actually put together a climbing management plan with the park and other stakeholders in the area, specifically for the purpose of like, all right, how do we manage this climbing site? And we've maintained that relationship over the years. That climbing coalition kind of phased in and out, and then when EPAC was started, we sort of took on that relationship.
And does EPAC's reach like it is Safe Harbor consider like do you guys consider that your crag also or not really?
No, so yeah, so the voice not in this conversation is South Central PA climbers. So they started off mostly with Gretna, Mount Gretna, and Governor's Stable bouldering areas, but I know they do work with Michaud State Forest. They recently did a parking lot project and trail reroute there. They've got some other things going on. Um, so we go as far over east as like Boxcar Rocks, which also sort of intersects with close to the safe harbor area. So we have a little bit of gray area we overlap. But yeah, safe harbor is SCPC territory.
As far as the grades in Western PA, at McConnells Mill, there are a good assortment of grades. There are um, some some easier climbs. There's nothing like easy, but there are climbs that like first time climbers can have some success with. So like you do have some moderate climbs again, like some 5.5s and 5.6s. Um, and then there are plenty of harder climbs. The grades, uh, the grades are old school grades. Back in the 70s, 5.9 was as hard as anyone was climbing, and so a 5.9 like was a hard climb. And then as time went on, as they started to like introduce 5.10s to the climbing world, like a lot of these routes in at McConnell's Mill were put up like so long ago that they were called 5.10s back when 5.10 was like pretty near the top of the scale. And the grades have not changed. So it's a pretty like the grading is pretty solid there, as is the case in most of our East Coast crags, West Virginia and Southwest PA. Plenty of 10s and 11s, and there are some 12s. So there are harder climbs, but again, they were given these numbers 30 years ago when 511 and 512, 510, 11, and 12 30 years ago was pretty near the top of the scale. Ohiopyle, as wonderful as Ohiopyle is, doesn't really have much beginning climbing at Ohiopyle. I mean, there are a handful of moderate routes, but be careful. Like I think the climbs that are called 5-6 and 5-7 and 5-8, they all feel pretty hard to me. They're not, I wouldn't consider them beginner climbs. Um, plenty at the next level up. The 10s, the 11s, and 12s at Ohiopyle are really, really solid and really fun. You need to be climbing at it's not really a beginner crag.
If you had to recommend one route in each of the parks, what would it be?
Ooh, uh, I'm gonna go with Neanderthal. So it's a very interesting sort of face climb up to this like overhanging slot. Um, it's a great top rope route. When you get up to the slot, there's not a lot of options, so you really have to find your way through. And it's also a really interesting trad climb for folks. So I'm sort of between that and Phone Booth, which is another overhanging classic. It's got some really nice holds down low, and then you get up into what's considered the Phone Booth area. There was a hold that came off couple years back that might have made it a little harder. But again, just kind of pulling the top moves on it. Um, they're a little bit on the moderate five. I think Neanderthals maybe like a 5-8, phone booths a 10. But right around both those areas too are a lot of really good classic climbs.
Oh, Christian, you're killing me now. It's not fair. At McConnell's Mill, Mission Impossible is probably the most iconic climb there, and they give it a 10B, and go fun route. Like I think many 512 climbers might have their would be challenged to get the on-site on that climb. Again, it's old school, and it's you climb over a little roof, and then it just gets really techy. And the sequence up there, it's not obvious. You got to find the right body position. And I mean, good luck if you're a gym climber that's used to just pulling down. If you're super strong and you could pull down on little holds, um, good luck on Mission Impossible, where you really have to read the rock and be pretty clever with how you're using holds. There's an undercling, there's a hip turn, there's some really techie stuff going on. Again, 10B, go for the on-site of Mission Impossible. Over at Ohiopyle, my two favorite routes there, and I get to say them together because they share the first bull, but Shifticus and Logia are fabulous routes. Shifticus is an 11B, it's 80 feet. Logia is a 12A, and it's maybe 70 or 60 feet. Just a whole lot of fun climbing, different styles. Like they both have a roof, they both have a steep section. Shifticus has all kind of real interesting shenanigans happening on that route that I just think is super fun. Yeah, so Logia and Shifticus, right next to each other at Ohiopyle. And again, Mission Impossible over at McConnell's Mill.
I will add that currently Neanderthals closed because we have a goose nesting on that ledge. So if you're coming to do that climb in the springtime, please check our website to make sure that the route is open because it's really hard to get off the ledge. So we obviously want to protect the nesting goose, but if you lead up this and the goose attacks you, it's really hard to get off safely.
A tale as old as time. We've been focusing we've been focusing on state parks. What sort of rock climbing is available on public lands and state forests around you?
So we don't have a whole lot. I'm trying to think. State forest wise, Macho State Forest is probably the closest to our region, but that's going to be SCPC territory. Again, we sort of overlap a little bit, and we're always helpful to lend a hand to our friends over there. And we share a lot of the same climbers that sort of live in between central and eastern PA. There's probably a bit up north that we haven't quite gotten into the weeds yet about permissions and figuring out what's out there. I know that there's a lot in the northern section of sort of central Pennsylvania. Again, the LCOs, we sort of overlap and have this commitment that if there's not an LCO in that area or our territory doesn't really extend, that we'll step up and assist. So I think, don't quote me, but I think the South Central PA climbers have been skirting a little north now. They've got some work they're doing in like the State College area and up in Hunter's Rocks, but not a whole lot of climbing state forest wise on our side. Game lands a lot. um, I think it's just by nature of who owns what public land. So
We've been really busy at SWPAC with an initiative that we call Climb Pittsburgh, and it's been it's been a pet project of mine. It's been a passion project, and we are super excited about what's happening. This has been 6 years in the making. That um, there are structures around Pittsburgh that people have been climbing for 30 or 40 years. This is these are sandstone block structures that we have all of these bridges, right? We're the city of bridges. We have all these bridges. We have all of these retaining walls that are made out of the natural rock that's been quarried, but it is natural rock. They're 2 foot by 3 foot blocks that are stacked on top of each other. They're always vertical, so they're dead vertical structures of natural rock that are all over our city that have 40, 50 year, 40 or 50 years of climbing history behind them. For the longest time, the folks that were climbing these things, it was always kept a secret. And nobody knew if we were, it was just assumed that we weren't allowed to be on these structures. So everybody tried to keep it as DL as possible. And really it was, these were like secret crags around the city and we used to climb in them. And no joke, like people would climb, the understanding was that you wore black clothes and that you used black webbing. And then some bolts started to show up on these routes, but everything was secret, right? And nobody really circulated this information with anybody. We at SWPAC take our access very seriously. We're also, very committed to the different DEI initiatives that are happening everywhere. And as an organization, we had some hard talks, some long hard talks about, do we want to try to open up these areas? Do we want to try to get permission to climb at these different areas around the city, knowing that we might risk having all of them, because people were climbing these areas, off radar, under the radar. And then we spent years going back and forth, like, do we try to get permission to climb in these areas and and then build them out fully? Because like they really weren't built out fully. They were being used to a moderate degree, but the potential for these areas are enormous. So 6 years ago, as an organization, we began reaching out to different city officials. 6 years later, no joke, 1,000 emails later, many meetings later, we've got great momentum on this. We've actually had FaceTime with the mayor. We've met with his inner circle. We've had really productive talks with the director of public works in the city, with the chief solicitor in the city, and the assistant solicitor, and the chief the landscape architect. So like all of the people that are involved in like making these things happen, we've met with them now personally many times, and it feels like we are like really, really close to having permission granted. Just 2 weeks ago, we had our last meeting, and they approved of us putting signs in one of our city parks that say climbing access, and that have arrows pointing to the new trailhead that we rebuilt, so that climbers can safely access the pillar where we climb and not keep barreling down this unstable hillside. And so we got the city to like put these signs up. So now, it feels like that I don't see that they're going to backtrack once they start putting signs in the ground that say climber access. Like, I think we're in the right direction. Last fall, the Access Fund sent their conservation team to Pittsburgh, and we did some work at Ohiopyle, but we also did some work at another one of our city parks, and we got permission from the director of public works to clear out the base of the wall. And it was a sloping, muddy hillside where people were belaying from. And not only was it uncomfortable, but it was a little bit sketchy. It was a little bit dangerous because it was so, the footing was so unsure. We got permission to put a retaining wall in, and we had professional consultants with us, and we put a 2-foot retaining wall in with 6x6 treated lumber, dead men, and 5 ton of gravel. And we created like a really comfortable, beautiful spot to belay in safely. And when we got permission to do that, and the proposal that we submitted to the city, we talked about the wall where people have been climbing for 30 years that has all of these routes on them. So, it was interesting. It was kind of a little bit of a, I mean, a little bit of a roundabout way to get permission, but we made very clear there is a wall where people rock climb. There, the belay area was not safe. We got permission to clean it up and make it safe. And we did that, and now that area is being used and enjoyed. There are 4 other areas in the city of that nature that people are using, and it's exciting to me when the weather's nice to go out around the city and see so many people in Pittsburgh are either riding their bike or taking public transportation, and they're able to rock climb. Before you needed a car, you needed money, and now like we're flipping that script a little bit. And once again, as far as access goes, like what this means for access, what this means for our community, to me, just feels so enormous. So keep your eye on Climb Pittsburgh. Like I think if the permission goes full on this and we're able to promote it the way we want to, I really expect that you're going to see national attention, and rock climbers are going to start to stop in Pittsburgh on their way to the New River Gorge. So the folks that are climbing like everywhere up north from like Erie and Buffalo and Cleveland, and central PA, like everyone that kind of has to come through Pittsburgh to get to the New and get to the Red, they're going to have a reason to stop in Pittsburgh and check out our urban climbing, and check out our city too.
I'll also mention oh, I was gonna mention, it escaped me for a second, but, Pinchot State Forest, which is Mackinac, um, didn't come to the forefront of my mind because 'cause we're experiencing a bit of a closure there, So not a closure in the DCNR property, but it intersects with a private landowner. And we haven't been able to gain access back to those areas, mostly due to them being concerned with liability, and also there being an active mining lease, which has constrained our ability to, work different avenues for access there. But that would be a state forest up in Luzerne County.
How would you describe rock climbing culture here in Pennsylvania?
So I think it's hard to brush the whole state, with a broad stroke. I would say, at least on the eastern side, so Pennsylvania in general doesn't really have like a destination climbing area. You'll hear climbers talk about the New or the Red or the Gunks, and like all the climbers converge on that area to climb. I think Pennsylvania, at least on the eastern side, is a little bit different, and we have a lot of really small areas. And what we've found is each of those areas have their own little community. Um, so what we've really tried to do as an organization, which is why we're such a broad region, is to kind of create this umbrella so that all of these little climbing areas have something to exist under for stewardship, grant funding. We don't have to create an organization for every single little climbing group out there. It's a lot of work. It takes a lot of investment. Volunteers, board members, we're all doing this on our own time. So, each one of those communities is just a little different. So, what you experience, say, down in Philadelphia in a county park is going to be different than in Northeast PA in a rural community. But I think by and large, the climbing community can just be a really fun, supportive place to be. I think Mike mentioned that early on in terms of, his love of connecting with community. And so, we're really interested in tapping into those communities, supporting those communities, and like he just said with the Climb Pittsburgh initiative, how do we expand those communities? How do we, make sure that there's equal and equitable access for anybody that wants to go climbing?
Pittsburgh is 3.5 hours from the New River Gorge. There's a great debate that rages what's the best climbing destination, in the East Coast, and is it the Red or is it the New? I love both. But the two, in my opinion, most spectacular crags in the East Coast are the Red River Gorge and the New River Gorge. Pittsburgh is the biggest city it's the closest big city to the New River Gorge. At 3.5 hours, we're the folks in Pittsburgh consider the New their home crag. And the New was predominantly developed by a Pittsburgh crew. At the forefront of the development of the New was Rick Thompson and that crew from Pittsburgh back in the 80s. That Rick wrote the first guidebook for the New. I mean, of course, there were Porter, what was involved, in Kenny Parker and Gene Kistler. I mean, it wasn't all Pittsburgh, but Rick Thompson and Carl Samples and that whole crew of Pittsburgh climbers, there were like 5 or 6. They were so instrumental, along with Eric Horst, who was another PA climber. Pittsburgh was really at the forefront of the development of the New River Gorge. And then as it continued to develop into the absolute world-class crag that it is, it has continued to be very much like Pittsburgh's. Like I said, Pittsburgh climbers consider the New their home crag. Also, Seneca Rocks, the folks from Pittsburgh that were the tradies from way back when, they lived at Seneca Rocks. And so Seneca and the New, like these were weekend trips for us, easy weekend trips for us. These were 3-hour trips for us, 3.5-hour trips for us. And so climbers in Pittsburgh for 40 years have been coming to West Virginia. So like when I think of our climbing community, of course we love our crags in PA, but our crags in PA are day trip crags. These are crags we go to when we can't go to the New and when we can't go to Seneca. And most of the folks that are really, really going after it, they're spending 1 or 2 or 3 weekends a month in West Virginia. Um, and so like I feel that West Virginia is inseparable from our climbing identity in Southwest PA.
Tell us about the climbing organizations you guys represent.
Eastern Pennsylvania Alliance of Climbers. We started in 2020 during the pandemic. Basically, like I said, we have a lot of very small climbing areas scattered throughout the region, and a lot of us were already doing conservation and stewardship work. With just a handful of friends or climbers at the crag, and at some point, you run out of your ability. Um, in terms of resources. So, you can't raise funds when you're just a couple climbers at a crag, and some of the projects get a little too big. And so, we found when the world was shutting down and climbing areas were shutting down and talking about, well, how do they reopen and what does this look like? We realized that there wasn't a voice for Eastern Pennsylvania climbers, or at least not a cohesive voice. And so we said, well, let's get that started. And at first we were focusing more in Bucks County area. Um, and then we pulled in some other folks, and like I said, regionally we've said Eastern Pennsylvania, which is everything from Philadelphia all the way to the Pennsylvania New York border, as far over as Boxcar Rocks, which is almost the middle of the state. So we formed with the ability to kind of grow into our shoes there. um and yeah, that's what we've been doing. We've started with some of the more popular climbing areas, or the places we've had the most connections, or the places that we have the access issues, and we've just been sort of building from there. So we are a new LCO, which is a local climbing organization. We're an affiliate of the Access Fund, which is the National Conservation Advocacy Organization. So we work with them a lot. But yeah, we're really only 3 years into this experiment. And so we're really growing as an organization.
Yeah, we've been at it a little bit longer, but not, like not so much. We've had our first year back in 2014. So I mean, I guess we are going on 10 years as an organization. Originally, it really was just a handful of a handful of guys that really loved to rock climb and wanted to try to up level their stewardship of different areas. The last 4 or 5 years, the organization has grown in just unbelievable ways. We've got well over 100 members. Um, we've been getting some big things done, and it's been exciting to me. It's been exciting for all of us to see how much involvement has been. There was an area on state game lands that people developed 30 years ago, and when they were putting bolts in the 90s, at the time, standard protocol was to use zinc plated bolts. And they were using 3/8 inch zinc plated bolts. And as we've come to see 30 years later, those zinc plated bolts don't do so well after 30 years of existing and in our environments. The area was seeing less and less use because people were so concerned about the state of the hardware. Like it became an area that like people were nervous about climbing in because it felt like all of those bolts on those routes were time bombs, right? One of our biggest early projects, and it took years of talking to the state game land folks. We got permission to go out to the Lost Crag and pull every one of those bolts. And there were hundreds and hundreds of bolts on. There were close to 100 routes out there, and we pulled every bolt on every route, and we put top anchors in. And most of those routes didn't have top anchors, so people were when you climbed at the Lost Crag, you had to top out on these boulders into like thick vegetation and build an anchor. And most people didn't have the skill set, you know, or and even those who didn't really like enjoy like it was pretty involved to top out on a vegetated boulder, build an anchor, and sit up there in the middle of like vegetation and belay your second up, and then find a way to get off the boulder, like wrap off or scramble off somehow. So like the place was seeing less and less use. It was a 3-year project. I did the math. I did the math at one point. I was out there on 60 different days. Each day that I would go out there, I would text bomb all of my friends. I'd send out 20 or 30 texts or 40 texts. I'd always get like 4 or 5 guys to come out with me every day that I went. My son was like my number one partner. And so on 60 different days, I had at least 4 or 5 guys with me on all 60 of those days. Some of those days we had 10 or 20 people. And some of those days, like when we pushed it out as a SWPAC event, there were a couple of days we had 30 volunteers out there cleaning the rock and doing the work. And we counted up our man hour. We had thousands and thousands and thousands of man hours of work at the Lost Crag, replacing over 300 bolts. Right after we finished, like a year later, and people were loving the place, using it so much. The Fish and Game Commission showed up and shared with us that they were concerned that there was some negative impact to one of the species in that game land. And they've asked us to not share that species, although I think most people know what it is now, but they've asked us to not even share that. Evidently, once people realize that a species is threatened, then they go and like hunt that species. And so like Fish and Game has told us to like just not kind of pump that out, for those reasons. But anyway, they've temporarily closed that game land to rock climbing. Now that was over a year ago, and we now once again, if it weren't for SWPAC, there's no way in the world that this would get unraveled. But we will unravel this, and we're right now we're talking to we have legal counsel, and at our last board meeting last week we discussed setting a certain amount of money aside so that we have someone working for us pro bono, but we're gonna go the next step. Like we're gonna start paying our legal counsel. We're gonna start paying for their services to really help us try to fast track the solution to all of this. But again, when the question started, us as an organization, we've been getting things done. We're really proud of the work that we've done. It's happened with so many volunteers stepping up and actually, getting their hands dirty and putting in all those work days. Though those were 10 and 12-hour work days. Like there's been a very demonstrable level of commitment to what we're doing to try to open up resources, to try to protect resources, just like we did at Beam Rock. Like we're doing our best to to open resources and to steward them so that we can continue climbing in these areas. And I think the community really appreciates it. They're behind us. Like I feel that we're on an upward rise right now, as far as the org goes, with Beam Rock, with Climb Pittsburgh, with all these things that are happening.
Dana, what sort of work has your organization been doing?
So like I said, we just hit the ground running. So part of the formation was really just, getting ourselves together and doing the paperwork to become an organization. A lot of the places we're doing work at, so High Rocks, Boxcar Rocks, Haycock, Mackinac, we've had long-standing relationships there. Stewardship days, graffiti removals that go back 10, 15 years. So we've sort of continued those and then have added on And the good thing about having some of these long-standing partnerships and events is it helps us to make new partnerships. So we just recently worked with Philadelphia County Parks and Rec and Friends of Wissahickon to do some cleanups in the Philadelphia area. We did one in the fall and just did one this past weekend of graffiti removal. Um, and also, some trash cleanup in those areas. So it's nice because you walk into a land manager and say, "Hey, so we climb on your rocks and we want to help, take care of this place." And they're sort of like, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" But when we're able to reference, especially DCNR state agencies, as our partners and to show the good work we've done with them, it really helps us get our foot a little further in the door. Some of these things, like Mike's been saying, takes years to do. So we do have some long-term projects, but we've definitely found that like showing up and doing the work, is especially starting with stewardship work, really goes a long way to cementing our relationship, our partnership, and our commitment, as not just users of the lands but stewards of the land.
I think that flows really nicely into the next question, which is how's your relationship with DCNR and state agencies?
Great. I mean, locally, our DCNR park here, which is it's interesting because it's Delaware Canal State Park Complex, and if you know anything about the Delaware Canal, it's huge, huge towpath, lots of infrastructure. There's a lot that goes into managing that, and Ralph Stover State Park is a very, very little part of that complex. Um, and like I said, we've had a relationship with DCNR, we being the climbing community, for well over 20 years. And so, every time we step up to do something, they've been very appreciative, very helpful. And they know that we're there to be partners. Like I said, we have this current goose closure, which doesn't have to be imposed. It is not really a protected species, but it's the right thing to do for the goose. It's the right thing to do for the climbers. So we're very proactive and very appreciative of working locally. Um, and we have that same relationship with a lot of our DCNR folks. We also have good relationships, or at least have started some good relationships at the leadership level at DCNR. So we have within DCNR what's called the Climbing Action Team that started about 2 years ago with a woman by the name of Diane Krippis, who has since retired, helped get that started, so that we can talk about policy level things. The one thing that we found is, state park and state forest managers, recreation foresters, they know some things and they can approve some things, but when things get kicked up the chain of command, sometimes some of that dialogue and information is lost. So we've started sort of a top-down approach also with the other PA LCOs and saying, hey, how can we broaden some of this stuff statewide? I mentioned earlier that there is a set of climbing guidelines the state put out with the help of Access Fund in 2009, I'm going to say, and we are suggesting revisions to that, to bring things up to current industry standards and best practices. We're looking at what state parks have climbing, but it's not permitted. Um, we're looking at ways to make a stronger tie to recreation. Nathan Rayner, the new director of outdoor recreation, we've had lots of conversations with him in an upcoming meeting to really talk about how to move this stuff forward. So, I feel like, locally and on a leadership level in DCNR, everybody's been super receptive. And, we don't just show up with problems, we show up with solutions and we show up as a partner, not just to complain or, hey, we need to do this, but this is what we want to do and this is how we can help.
Yeah, it feels very similar to me. Our relationship with these folks is very good, and it feels like it's getting better. And each time we partner with them for different projects, the projects have come out really well. I think they're super satisfied with the quality of our work, but not just with the quality of our work, but they're able to see pretty quickly that we share the same vision. We love these resources. We're like the relationship feels so reciprocal to me. That's why it's such a great one, because we really are supporting each other. We have a shared vision. We care about the things they care about, um, and great things are getting done. I'll just add one other like little one other additional kind of piece to all of this is um, the climbing community in general is growing so much these days. There are so many climbing gyms popping up everywhere. Um, there's this unbelievable proliferation of like indoor climbing, and the more folks that are climbing, we know it's in the Olympics. Like it really has become mainstream and reached out to the general population in a way that it just never was 30 years ago. 30 years ago, it was a fringe activity. Now it is mainstream. Everybody's rock climbing. Um, Given all of the people that are climbing, I feel that we, as LCOs, become more important than ever to help be the mentors that are needed to help the new climbers go into these outdoor spaces. And I think the land managers are recognizing that they really need us to help be communicating best practices with with these unbelievable numbers of people that are now going out and using these resources. So once again, it feels really reciprocal to me that I don't want to overplay that they need us, but we clearly have something to offer to them, and we want to partner with them, and I think they're appreciating how much we do have to offer as being the voice of the community.
You talked about rock climbing becoming mainstream. One of the main reasons for that was the release of Free Solo, the 2018 documentary about Alex Honnold's quest to perform a free solo climb of El Cap in Yosemite. Dana, how have you seen the sport grow?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that Free Solo kicked off all of it, but it definitely, brought it to people's attention in a way that was very interesting to, I think, non-climbers, and got the attention of folks that it might not have. There's a handful of people in the world that can do what he does. Most of us are not at that level. Most people who start climbing are not going to get to that level. What I'll say is, like Mike said, I think that gyms are really the driver behind this. And again, we're a little different than other recreation activities where you like can start inside and go outside, but the skills aren't exactly transferable. And so, we're seeing a lot of new climbers, which is really exciting, but can also be concerning in terms of skill level, in terms of ethics. And one of the ways that our access can be compromised is by not taking care of these places, by having accidents. Um, and so I think it's really important that the gym community and, the outdoor community, and the LCOs stay connected because, I mean, I work in the climbing gym community, and we can create climbers a lot faster than we can create stewards. And we've seen it over the pandemic with a lot of our public um, spaces being overrun by people just running out the door and finding the outdoors for the first time. And we know a lot of our infrastructure couldn't handle that, both climbing and otherwise, and that hasn't really stopped. We have to be mindful and be a driving force behind, sustainability for this, and that's where partnering with the land managers come to. A lot of them are under resourced too. So when we can bring volunteers to the table to help out, when we can educate new climbers about best practices and maybe reduce impact on the land or whatever it may be, that's of great help. But it's not something that necessarily comes inherently from this boom in climbing interest. So
With additional people taking up climbing, how do you balance access with preservation?
very carefully. um Yeah, I mean, like I said, we saw more people at crags, and it got noticed when I talked to folks down in Philadelphia. They said we didn't realize how many climbers there were until the gyms were closed, and everybody ran outside because they could go outdoor climbing. They just bought a crash pad, and it's a lot of bouldering down in Philadelphia. So it really got noticed, and I think a lot of it comes down to education. We just need to talk to people about leave no trace, about ethics, and also how all these land manager interactions um, work. Mike and I, I'm sure, can talk about that to no end, but a lot of people don't see this behind the scenes work that takes years, decades to get done. So we have to figure out a way to communicate that better to the climbing community and to find folks in the climbing community to be our voices and our ambassadors. Um, because if we do it responsibly, we'll be able to have access. If too many things are sort of falling to the wayside and we have, species of concern that pop up, or rare plants, or whatever the case may be, we have to pay attention to that stuff, and we have to work with the land managers because, that's where access issues are going to come into play.
Yeah, it's a concern, Christian. These numbers sometimes I fear that they're not sustainable in any way. Like I do get worried. You know, I'm at the crag. I have a house here at the New River Gorge, and I've been on sabbatical this year, so I've had a wonderful opportunity to I've climbed all year, just all year, mostly here, but in many other places also. And there's just so many days that I'm out, and there's so many people at the crag, and it kind of scares me a little bit. Um, like Dana says, we need to educate for sure. I mean, that's our only hope in all of this is that the people that have a really good understanding as to how to be good stewards are out there and influencing all the new folks that are coming out. I tell so many of my friends, like a lot of the old heads are grumbling about like what's going on these days, and I think it's more important than ever that we're present, that we're present and we're trying to be good examples, and we're trying to help demonstrate best practices, that people learn when they see good practice. It's one thing to tell people what to do, but they need to see good practice. And so I would hope that all the folks that have been at this for a long time and that treasure the experience and are hoping to preserve it, I would hope that like we're all still being visible, to the best of our ability and helping to demonstrate best practices.
I think another hope is that we get more access. I mean, we've got a considerable amount of parks that have climbing in them that, it would be great for that to be approved activity. We've got, definitely some places in state forests that could be better developed to accommodate these. So if we think of the fact that we're getting more climbers into the system, right now we have a very finite resource. So how do we broaden that resource? Birdsboro Climbers Quarry is a great example of taking, something left from an extracted industries and turning it into a multi-use park where people climb, bike, hike, fish. So we need to look around at where there's, at least for us, rock, and figure out how to get that land either into our hands as LCOs, or into, with our partners at DCNR, and open up more climbing and sort of spread that population out as best we can. And Pennsylvania is a huge state, and there's a lot of climbing potential in it, and a lot of climbers, maybe not all of them, but a lot of us are um, you know, multi-users. So yeah, we're gonna go to a place, we're gonna climb, we're gonna hike, we're gonna bike. We might kayak if we're going out to, the Yak or something like that. So if we can give people more options, then hopefully we can spread them out within the system.
Yeah. Yes, very well said. And again, I'm thinking as you say all of that, Climb Pittsburgh, that was the drive of Climb Pittsburgh when we met with the city, is that we have all of these abandoned structures, either abandoned or underutilized structures, and we could give something that has like no use a very real and a very real value. That's part of the drive of Klein Pittsburgh, is to repurpose underutilized structures. Dana was speaking a little bit to that, but also just this idea of, there are resources out there, and hopefully these land managers begin to recognize the more that we open up, hopefully the more dispersion happens, and there's less of a negative impact on the real popular. We need to spread it out more.
The other thing too is like with state parks specifically, state parks are for people to go to. There's infrastructure, there's bathrooms and parking. You're not going to necessarily find that at every state forest or game land, but what a perfect place to teach people how to climb. You can't go to any state forest necessarily and do guided activities or commercial activities. Game lands is even more restrictive on that. But if we're talking about taking people from the gym outside climbing, to me, a state park is a great avenue to be able for whoever, whether it's the state park staff themselves or local outfitters, to teach climbing and impart these ethics and the need for conservation and connect and be that stepping stone between the gyms and our more sort of wild and secluded climbing areas.
Well, that's a perfect shift into one of the last questions. If you had a magic wand and somebody said, we have 124 state parks, which one do you want to open up to climbing next? What's the one that you want to pick?
That's a loaded question because if I say it out loud and people are currently climbing there, they might just close it down since it's not permitted. um,
That's a very interesting issue.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of these, parks that people are climbing in and have been, but it's technically not permitted. Um, I would say for us on the eastern side of the state, Lehigh Gorge. Um, There's a lot of climbing in the gorge, there's a lot of potential. There have been some even, like, hiking areas that have been closed because of, falls and whatnot from hikers, not necessarily climbers. There's some ice climbing opportunity in it. There's a hike, or a bike trail that goes through there, which would be great for allowing folks with disabilities to be able to get closer to the crag, and other folks with mobility challenges. I just think there's a huge potential, and there's already a lot going on there with the rafting in the town and whatnot. So, I would certainly say that's a park that would be on our radar.
How about you, Mike?
I'm going to pass on that question.
Playing coy. I see what you're doing. If someone's interested in joining your organizations, how should they get in touch?
So I mean, go on our website. There's a couple different areas where you can contact us, share your information. You can do it on social media as well. But yeah, just drop us a line. Let us know what you're interested in. We try to categorize people sort of by climbing area. So if there's something going on there, whether it's an access issue or a stewardship event or a gym to crag at a local climbing gym, we'll try to push that information out to you. Again, we're still in the growing stages, so we've been building our board, and now we hope to build our core volunteers to help us get more work done.
I would encourage people to go to our website. There is information there. There are emails there that you could reach out to us as an org and ask us whatever it is that you need to know, and we can put you in touch. We could steer you in the right direction. We would love for everyone to become a member. The only way this work continues is through our membership. We need volunteers. The membership money helps helps us do the projects that we do. So we need members. You know, if you're out climbing and you're out clipping bolts, think ask yourself where these bolts came from. Someone's paying for them. Most of these areas are, if they're not being equipped out of people's personal pockets, they're being funded by LCOs. And it's just so critical that folks that are out using these resources, that they're helping to support. If you can't do the volunteer work, I would hope that you could at least become a member of your local climbing organization. Your membership dollars do make a difference. And your voice matters too. As we build our membership and we're going to all of these land managers, the more people we have in our organization, the more of an impact, we can speak with more authority and more representation as we grow as an organization. So please go to our website. If you need information about, there's information on our website as to how to become a member. If you need more specific information, drop us a line. There's an email there. We will answer any of your questions, and we can help. We can help steer people in the right direction.
Dana, Mike, thanks so much for talking to me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Christian. Thanks for caring about rock climbing. Thanks for helping us. This is so important to us. I'm sure Dana will say the same thing. We care about this so deeply, and being able to get good information out to people that are interested in climbing is just as important to us as it is to you. So thank you, Christian.
Yeah, and for all that you're doing for state parks and forests, I don't think people realize what a wealth of opportunity there is for climbers and all folks that want to get outside, and they need all of our support. And there's a great untapped potential for a lot of folks in Pennsylvania. I think some people take it for granted how good we have it with the amount of trails and waterways and climbing and biking and all of these great activities that you don't get that diversity of recreation in every state. And the state of Pennsylvania is putting a lot of money and effort towards developing that. So I think there's some really interesting things and a lot of opportunity to come.
I want to thank my guests Dana Carrecciolo and Mike Varlotta for joining the podcast. Be sure to visit our website and follow us on Instagram and Facebook for more information about upcoming episodes. This has been Hemlocks to Hellbenders. I'll see you out there. Hosting, production, and editing by Christian Alexandersen. Music by John Sauer. Graphics by Uncle Traveling Matt's Random Expedition.